Okay, just a few more notes on Julius Caesar. I think I mentioned last time that there was an empire during this time. There really wasn't. The empire didn't begin until the fellow behind me had died. That's Augustus Caesar. He's known in this play as a younger man, Octavius. He will eventually rule Rome, but not just yet. No, he has to fight the senators along with Mark Antony, and he's going to beat them in the end. The play doesn't leave us with a very happy note at the end. It seems as if Rome has fallen to chaos, and that's how the play ends. It's a strange play in that way, because it doesn't offer us any real release, you might say, that you would get from a tragedy. That's a note, by the way, by Mark Van Duren on the play. It's an unhappy ending. Even as a tragedy, it doesn't satisfy in that classical sense. What is Shakespeare saying about the fact that Rome falls apart like this? It's an interesting question, because we wonder if there isn't some sense of inevitability about the whole thing. The play goes forward by individual perceptions, by individual characters, each of whom in the play seems to have to convince somebody else about his point of view. The play is rhetorical in that sense, and it's appropriate to Rome. Shakespeare had a tremendous historical sense, I think. It's appropriate to Rome in the sense that this is how the Romans studied. They learned how to present arguments in court. The Greeks did the same thing. And when Shakespeare went to school as a young lad, he studied Latin rather than English. And in studying Latin, he learned about the Romans and their rhetorical concepts, how to formulate an argument. Another thing that the critic Van Duren mentions is that Shakespeare uses very simple language in this. There's an awful lot of monosyllables. I don't know whether the Romans used monosyllables in their daily expressions, but they, in this play, give a sense of a kind of Roman stoicism. But the play, again, proceeds in this way as one individual finds himself at odds with another and somehow has to, or in a different situation mentally than another, and has to convince the other person. And it begins with the question that Cassius asks Brutus. Tell me, good Brutus, can you see your face? Now, we can't see our faces because here we are. We're always looking outward. And so Cassius proceeds by saying, you can't see anything beyond yourself except by a mirror. And he uses the image of the mirror to try to convince Brutus to join the conspirators. He said, you don't realize how everybody looks to you and how important you are in public life in Rome. So I'm going to be your mirror and tell you how you look to other people. This underlines the existential individualism of everybody in this play. And because everybody's different, and because they go and kill the main man, who himself has got this problem of not really knowing who he is, or not seeing himself appropriately. That's Julius Caesar, of course. He seems to be the keystone that holds the whole structure together. Everything is going to start to fall apart. I'll just read something here. After Julius Caesar is killed, Julius Caesar has said he's the only man who can stand up against all the forces of life. And of course, right after he says this, the senators all go and stab him to death. It's, in a way, ironic. There's a buffoonish quality to Caesar, as well as some wisdom, too. He says very strange things. I'm sorry, not strange things. He says very common sense things. And then on the other hand, he shows his superstition, and on the other hand, he shows his immense egotism. Now, we find that after the funeral speech, the mob, the speeches of Antony, rather, 2 speeches, the mob begins to just roam through Rome and destroy everything. They are totally insensible as to what they're doing, and they kill innocent people along the way. Who takes over after this? Well, the senators leave Rome, and Antony and Octavius take over. But they have not the same sense of nobility that the senators had. they start just killing people through what is called a proscription. They have a list of people, and as they say it, they prick off the names of certain high-class senators in order to get their get their fortunes, really, to inherit, so that they can supply their armies. And they go so far as to kill their own relatives in this. This is how brutal and unscrupulous they are. Here's Act 4, the beginning of Act 4. They're looking at a list of names here, and Antony says, as he looks at it, these many then shall die. Their names are pricked. And Octavius says, your brother too must die. Consent you, Lepidus? He's the third man of that triumvirate. Lepidus says, I do consent. Prick him down, Antony, says Octavius. Lepidus, upon condition, Publius shall not live. Who's your sister's son, Mark Antony? And there they are, just trading people off as to who's going to die. Very far cry from the noble aspirations of particularly Brutus, but also the other senators as well. The play then begins to deteriorate until the end, when things fall apart for the senators, who can't seem to agree on anything, and what gets in the way is their own personalities. Apparently Brutus has been asked by Cassius to give him some money, and Brutus won't do it. Why? Because he doesn't think that Cassius has been behaving honorably. He hasn't been behaving honorably. And they get into this fight. And Cassius says, I can't believe you're treating me like this. And he really is practically, he's practically drawn to tears. And Brutus says, no, I don't think you understand why we fought and why we killed Caesar. And Cassius says, but we have to win a war virtually. And eventually it's Cassius who gives in. It's interesting. Now, I mentioned last time it's Cassius that has contradicted himself in the sense that while he's the man who's looking for action and who's getting the conspirators together and then engaging Brutus as part of the conspirators, he gives in every time to Brutus. In other words, he can't ultimately act as he wants to. And so the play draws to its conclusion, and we are left on the battlefield. As Mark Antony and Octavius view the bodies, they notice that Brutus is there, and they honor him by calling him the most noble Roman of them all. I don't think that's grammatical, at least in the text here. Let's see what it says here. This was the noblest Roman of them all, says Antony. All the conspirators, save only he, did what they did in envy of great Caesar. He only, in general honest thought and common good to all, made one of them. His life was gentle, and the elements so mixed in him that nature might stand up and say to all the world, this was a man. It's quite a nice way to end the play. But then again, see who's ruling there? And you can see behind me who comes to rule as, not the first emperor, by the way. It's Tiberius who's the first emperor in 14 AD. And so the play ends. Thanks.